Hello, young math Padawans. This is Angel with your lesson for today on congruence using geometric notation. So we've done a little bit of work with congruence if you're given a measure of a side or a measure of an angle. But what if you're not given a measure like 5 centimeters or 29 degrees, and instead you have to show that they're congruent using something else? That's where geometric notation comes in. So when we're dealing with segments like we have over here in segment AB and segment CD, to show that they are congruent to each other, we could give them some measurements. We could say AB is 5 centimeters and CD is 5 centimeters, but there's actually something that's a little bit simpler than that. Instead, we can use the notation for congruent sides, and that is a tick mark. Imagine a tick mark to be exactly what it sounds like, just drawing a little line through the middle of the segment. If I draw one tick mark on segment AB and one tick mark on segment CD, I have now shown that these two are congruent without having to put in any type of measure. I could also put 2 tick marks on segment AB, but then I would have to put 2 tick marks on segment CD. So not only do you use tick marks, but you have to use the same amount of tick marks to show that they are congruent. What about our angles? Here we have to show that angle S is congruent to angle J. And again, we could put in a measurement like 29 degrees, but there is an easier way to do so using geometric notation, and that is with an arc. Imagine an arc to be like a rainbow. It's going to go from one side of the angle to the other. So if I draw an arc inside of angle S and an arc inside of angle J, I'm now showing that those are congruent angles. If I chose to put 2 arcs inside of angle S, then I'd have to put 2 arcs inside of angle J. Or let's go wild, put 3 arcs in angle S, then I'd have to put 3 arcs in angle J. So the amount of arcs will show you which angles are congruent to each other. Let's take a look at what this looks like in our triangles. So the directions here say to write a statement that indicates that the triangles in each pair are congruent. So we've got a pair of triangles and they've already got tick marks and arcs in there. So let's take a closer look. There's a couple ways to do this. We could start with the side lengths and finding the tick marks. So I noticed that this side has 1 tick mark, as does this side, and side MN has 2 tick marks, just like side HI. But actually, because when we're writing out the side lengths, the order matters, I like to start with the angle measures. So I'm going to start by looking for the number of arcs. So what do I notice first? I notice that angle L has a single arc, and angle G also has a single arc, which means that those 2 angles are congruent. Angle L is congruent to angle G, okay? I also notice that angle M has 2 arcs, and angle H also has 2 arcs, which means angle M is congruent to angle H. And finally, angle N has 3 arcs, and so does angle I, which means that angle N is congruent to angle I. Now that I've gone in and noticed what angles are congruent, I can go in and label the sides that are congruent as well. Okay, let's start with the 1 tick mark side. So the first one that I see is LM. That has a single tick mark, and so does GH. So if I'm going to write this congruency statement, I would write that segment LM is congruent to, would that be GH or HG? Well, we're going from 1 to 2 arcs, so we'd also have to go from 1 to 2 arcs in this notation, and that would be segment GH. Continuing on, in the first triangle, I noticed that side MN has 2 tick marks, as does side HI. So those are also congruent. Side MN is congruent to side HI or IH? HI, because H has those 2 arcs and I has the 3. That leaves us with side NL with our 3 tick marks and side IG with our 3 tick marks. So NL is congruent to side IG. G. Now that we've labeled all of our congruent parts, we can go in and state that these two triangles are congruent in a true congruency statement. And to do that, you're going to want to look right here at your angle measures. So if I decide to name the first triangle, triangle LMN, then I would want to name the second triangle, triangle GHI. That shows me that both triangles are congruent and all of their corresponding parts are congruent as well. All right, now that you've seen one, why don't you try this one on your own? Find all congruent angles, all congruent side lengths, and use that to write your congruent statement. So now that I labeled all of my congruent parts, I'm going to go in and write my congruent statement. So if I'm using my angles, then the first triangle's name is going to be triangle STU, congruent to, it appears, triangle VXW. And that shows me that all of those angles are corresponding and congruent, along with all of the side lengths. Mark the angles and sides of each pair of triangles to indicate that they are congruent. Okay, so now we're given the congruency statement and we have to go in and use the appropriate notation. Let's take a closer look at number 5. Just as before, I'm going to start with my angle measures. So the angles of triangle ECD are congruent to the angles of triangle XYZ in the same order. So if I decide to give one arc to triangle or to angle E, then I would also give one arc to its corresponding angle X. So angle E is congruent to angle X. Now, when I come into the next angle C and Y, instead of using one arc, because that's already been used, I'm going to use two arcs to show that angle C is congruent to angle Y. And finally, to show that angle D is congruent to angle C, I'm going to use 3 arcs. Angle D is congruent to angle Z. Now that all the angles are labeled, I can go in and show which sides are congruent. I'm going to do that with the use of tick marks. And I can also not only look at the image, but also look at the statement. This is showing me that side EC is congruent to side XY. So EC gets 1 tick mark, and XY also gets 1 tick mark to show that they are congruent. This is also showing me that side CD is congruent to side YZ. Well, I've already used 1 tick mark, so I'm going to use 2 tick marks on side CD and 2 tick marks on side YZ to show that those are congruent. That means that the only last option here is that side DE, going from the 3 arc to the 1, is congruent to side ZX. And you can see that in the statement right here. Side DE and side ZX. Now that all the side lengths and angles are marked, we can say that these two triangles are congruent, and the diagram shows that. Okay, your turn. Go ahead and copy down triangles ABC and PQR and use geometric notation to show that they are congruent. All right, so according to this statement, angle A is congruent to angle P, C is congruent to angle Q, and B is congruent to angle R, and you can see that in the arcs. Side AC is congruent to side PQ, side CB congruent to side QR, and side BA congruent to side RP as shown by the tick marks. So in closing, to show congruence in geometry, we use tick marks to show equal side lengths and arcs to show equal angle measures. That's it for today's lesson. I will see you next time.